Hello, and welcome to another episode of Mythic for Developers. Today, I want to talk about third-party service agents. So this is something that's a bit unique to Mythic. Normally, when we talk about an agent for a C2 platform, what we're really talking about is being able to generate some sort of binary or payload. We then move that over to a target system, execute it. It calls back to our C2 platform, does some sort of negotiation. We get a new callback entry that we can then interact with. When we interact with that callback, we issue some sort of tasks, execute assemblies, BOFs, stuff like that. And then from within there, those tasks get executed on that target system. For a third-party service agent, though, the goal is a bit different. We don't want to be executing something on a remote host. Instead, we want to, from within the Mythic UI, interact with the remote API of some third-party service. This could be, cloud-hosted things. This could be locally hosted things. It has to be something that naturally Mythic can reach and hit the API for. So if we look over here in the Mythic UI, it's pretty easy to see which things are called out as agents versus third-party service agents. We have that little type field here. For example, Appel and Apollo are agent. We already saw that we have translation containers. And so down here, you can see this third-party service. So we have Bloodhound as an example, Ghostwriter as an example. There's all sorts of stuff out there. These things have a lot of the standard features that we're used to expecting now. Authors, operating systems, descriptions, stuff like that. If we hop over to the code and start looking at it from that perspective, it'll also feel very familiar. So we have the same sort of structured folder type that we've been seeing before. We have our same config.json. Inside of our payload type folder, we have this folder, which would be copied over into the installed services on the Mythic installation. Inside of here, we have that same RabbitMQ config that we're talking about for doing local development. We have this main.py that goes through to import Mythic container, import the agent itself, and then start and run forever. So far, nothing's different. Inside of here, we have our builder.py. Remember, the whole goal here is just to go through and import things from this payload builder, subclass this payload type with your own, and import it. So we give a name, Bloodhound, we have a file extension, author, stuff like that you were seeing in the UI. This supported OS is a little bit different. If we look at, standard payloads that we're looking at for red teaming and stuff like that, you're trying to build some sort of binary or file that gets executed on a specific operating system. So Windows, Mac OS, Linux, stuff like that. For talking to a third-party service, though, that can really happen from any operating system. You're just hitting a remote API. So calling out a specific OS at this point doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Instead, what we can do is just call out the third-party service that we're trying to interact with. This really helps as somebody goes through the UI to build a payload. It makes it a lot easier for people to identify like, oh, hey, this is a third-party service thing that I'm trying to build versus something that's going to be executed on maybe a Windows system. If we keep looking through here, we have the same other fields that we're looking at, wrappers, descriptions, translation container, stuff like that. The key that's going to identify that this is a third-party service versus a normal agent is this part right here. Normally, you don't have to include this. By subclassing this payload type class, you will by default be of agent type agent. This is your standard thing that you would create, Appel, Apollo, Poseidon, stuff like that. If we want to change that type from standard agent to this third-party service, all we do is set agent type equals agent type.service. It's just a string, it just says service, pretty easy. And now whenever we sync over, we'll get that third-party service little type associated with the payload. We can, of course, still have icons associated with this third-party service, just like we could with anything else. Another kind of unique thing for this is there's not really going to be any C2 profiles associated with these sorts of third-party service agents, because again, they're not calling back from a target system trying to go through, dynamic HTTP or WebSockets or communicating through Twitter and all sorts of stuff. The whole goal is that it's just a standard API request that we're doing, ideally as an authenticated user. So because there is no actual thing that we create to run on a target system to get our callback, if we want to be able to issue tasks to this, we still have to have some sort of way to get a callback in the Mythic UI to then interact with. What we can do is inside of our build function, we can use this API call, Mythic RPC callback create. So we are saying, hey, as part of this build process, pre-create and get ready for us a callback that we can then interact with that's associated with everything that we just specified for this build. So here we can see the payload UUID is self.uuid, the specific thing that we built all of our configuration options. There's no C2 profile that's associated with this because we don't have any that's associated with our payload type. And then because we are making a new callback entry in that list of active callbacks, we want to be able to specify something that's intuitive for the user to identify, hey, this is a Bloodhound callback, or this is a Ghostwriter callback versus something that's coming from your target system. So you can set all these same sorts of fields, user, host, IP, integrity level, domain, process name, like all that same sort of stuff that you can set for a callback, you can set here, anything to help make it a bit easier for you to identify. I found that having the user and host as Bloodhound makes it pretty easy to identify, but to each their own. But that means that the moment that we click build for a payload, this API call is going to get hit, and we're going to see a new callback getting displayed in our Mythic UI. And then that's how we're going to be able to interact with it. Now, if we are interacting with a third-party service, ideally, if I issue a task to that service and you issue a task to that service, we want them to be treated as coming from our specific user contexts. We don't want to make it so that everybody on the team has their own login to Mythic, but when interacting with the service, everything kind of gets scrunched together, and now you can't tell who's doing what with that service. So to get around that, you probably noticed this already. Here in the description for Bloodhound, for example, it says Bloodhound API ID, and we have Bloodhound API key. Even for Ghostwriter, we have Ghostwriter API key. So some way to identify who we want to authenticate as for this. So what we can do, the way that this happens in Mythic is with secrets. So if you come over here to your user, select your user settings, there's this little key. So this is your secrets key. You can click this and set any key value pairs that you want. They're just strings. They tend to be, this will be the key that is requested by that third-party service. So like the Bloodhound API key, the Ghostwriter key, stuff like that. And then whatever value that you want associated with it. Only you can see your own secrets, so you don't have to worry about somebody else clicking in and viewing and taking your API keys and stuff like that. The way this gets used, though, is whenever you go through and you actually issue a task, in this case to the Bloodhound agent, all of your user secrets are sent down with your task so that they're available to the payload type container if they need to use it or not. So that's how your Bloodhound instance, in this case, will go through and fetch your ID and API key to authenticate as you to Bloodhound to be able to issue queries and do stuff like that. Same with if you were using Ghostwriter, you provide your own API key, and that way we can track, as you go through and add findings or mark objectives, that it's you that's doing it. So we can keep that sort of user authentication transparent through all of it. So if we come over here and we look at our payloads, we can create a new payload just like normal. We can see here now we have this Bloodhound entry. Select it. We can provide any data that we might need for building, stuff that's a bit more generic across everybody that's using it. So in this case, the URL for wherever Bloodhound exists. That's all we really need. In my case, I'm running Bloodhound locally, so some of the ports are already taken. So I'm running on port 8088. All the commands, just like we saw over here in the code for the agent, you can identify if you support dynamic loading or not. Just to make things easier for people, I said that this agent does not support dynamic loading, and so you can just expect to have all your commands available for you there. There's no C2 profiles. We're talking to a third-party service directly via its API, and then you can provide a name or anything like that. So the moment we hit create down here, we're going to see the payload build process kick off, and we're going to get a new callback. So here we go, payload build, new callback. And you can see here, we specified a user and host. We did not specify a PID, so we have PID of 0. So we can come over here to our callbacks. We can see now we have this one entry up here for Bloodhound, and you can interact with it just like any other. So there's a who am I can issue it. It uses that secret that I had set in my user configuration and uses this to then talk to Bloodhound and get some information. So here we can see I authenticated as admin to pull data here. And then you can execute queries and everything like that. So it's a pretty nice way to hook into the Mythic UI and all the Mythic UI features that exist, but still talk to any sort of arbitrary third-party service that has an API you can leverage. And using these secrets allows you to really, make sure that you aren't exposing extra secrets unnecessarily. Everything can still be properly tracked on who's doing what, not just within Mythic, but third-party services. It's a pretty unique but pretty handy way to go through and start tying your normal operations into the various other services you might already be using as part of normal operations.